Mara Zeller tightened her grip on the prescription bag in her hand, her other arm cradling a box of off-brand cough syrup like it was made of glass, while the toddler in her arms squirmed and coughed against her shoulder. "Just a little longer, Daisy," she whispered into her daughter's damp curls. "Almost done." The pharmacy line was crawling. Flu season had turned the downtown drugstore into chaos. People grumbled under their breath, and the air smelled like rubbing alcohol and desperation. Mara's jeans were damp from where Daisy's leaky sippy cup had soaked through. Her hair was in a crooked bun, and she hadn't eaten since half a granola bar that morning. She was 3 people from the front, and her wallet held exactly $12. The man ahead of her wore a tailored navy coat that fit so perfectly it had to be custom. He stood tall, shoulders broad, the kind of posture that said he'd never waited in any line longer than 5 minutes in his life. His dark hair was slicked back in a way that should have looked arrogant, but somehow didn't. His voice was low and smooth when he spoke to the cashier. Mara wasn't paying attention until she heard, "I'll cover hers too," and her eyes snapped up. "Excuse me?" she asked, blinking. He turned slightly, just enough for her to see his face, strong jaw, clean-shaven, eyes as sharp as they were kind. "You're holding a sick kid and cough syrup with a price tag someone should be arrested for. Let me get it." "No, really, she started, but her voice cracked. Daisy coughed again, this time harder, her little face scrunching up with discomfort. The man handed the cashier his card. "It's already done." Mara stared at him, stunned. "Why would you do that?" He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time, and something about his gaze made her heart skip. "Because I can." He didn't wait for a thank you. He took his bag, nodded once, and walked out the door like nothing had happened. Mara stood frozen for a second, then turned to the cashier, who handed her the bag with a smile. "He paid for everything. Even the extra tissues you grabbed." She walked out a minute later, stepping into the freezing wind with Daisy pressed against her. But her mind wasn't on the cold. It was on the man with the navy coat and quiet eyes. The man who didn't even leave his name. She didn't know that the man who'd paid for her medicine, who had disappeared into the snowy street like a ghost, was Xavier Steele, CEO of Steele Enterprises, a billion-dollar conglomerate with an intimidating glass tower that loomed just a few blocks away from her tiny apartment. She didn't know that he'd noticed the way her arms trembled while holding her child, or the way she bit her lip to stop it from quivering. And she definitely didn't know that he would fall in love with her. Xavier didn't normally stop at that pharmacy. In fact, he hadn't stepped into a drugstore in years. But something about that day, his driver stuck in traffic, a splitting headache, and a rare afternoon with no meetings had pushed him to walk the few blocks from his penthouse. He didn't expect to see her. The woman with tired eyes and soft brown curls. The one who held her daughter like she was the most precious thing on earth. The one who didn't ask for help, didn't even want it. He couldn't shake her image from his mind, which was ridiculous. He had a board meeting in 20 minutes and over 300 employees waiting on his next decision. He didn't have time to think about a stranger in a pharmacy, but he remembered the exact shade of her eyes even as his assistant rattled off profit margins. Her voice had cracked when she tried to refuse him. That stayed with him. "Xavier," his assistant leaned in. "Are you even listening?" He blinked. "Yeah. Yes. Sorry. Continue." But he wasn't paying attention, and he didn't know he'd see her again. 2 weeks later, Mara nearly dropped the tray of drinks she was carrying when the front door of the cafe opened and he walked in. The same man. The man from the pharmacy. She was working the early shift at Café Nora, the small downtown coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and stress. It was barely 8, and she'd already spilled oat milk on her apron and had to fish a crayon out of the espresso machine. He walked in like he didn't belong there, like he'd wandered into the wrong part of town. But he didn't look lost, he looked curious. And then he saw her. Their eyes locked. Mara's heart punched her chest with a force that made her grip the counter. He walked straight to her. "You're the woman from the pharmacy," he said, his voice soft but certain. She stared at him. "And you're the man who paid for my cold medicine." "Guilty." She laughed once, short and surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I was walking by. Saw the sign. Thought I'd try something new." His gaze flicked to the menu. "What's good?" "Depends." She folded her arms. "Are you the kind of guy who drinks black coffee, or the kind who secretly likes whipped cream and caramel drizzle?" He raised one brow. "You think I'd admit to liking whipped cream?" I think you're exactly the kind of guy who wouldn't admit it, she teased, and for the first time in weeks, she actually smiled. He ordered a black coffee, of course. She made it herself, even though she wasn't on barista duty. When she handed it to him, their fingers brushed. It was barely a touch, but it buzzed like electricity. I'm Mara, she said. Xavier, he replied. And that was how it started. Over the next few weeks, he came back. Always early in the morning, always ordering the same thing. Sometimes he sat and worked on his laptop. Sometimes he just watched the street. But he always talked to her. They talked about Daisy and how she was feeling better. He asked about her art degree she never got to finish. She asked what he did for work and he just said, business, and changed the subject. He never pressed, never pushed. But every time he walked in, her day got better. And every time he left, she felt like something had left with him. She didn't know who he really was. Not yet, but she felt something real pulling her toward him. Something she hadn't felt since Daisy's father walked out when she was pregnant. Something frightening, and exciting, and dangerous. Because she was just a single mom with rent due and dreams on hold. And Xavier Steele? He was about to change her life. Mara hadn't realized how quickly a stranger could become a habit until Xavier didn't show up one morning. She glanced at the door more than once during the rush hour shift, her hands moving automatically as she rang up orders and slid pastries into paper bags. The bell above the door would chime and her heart would lift for half a second before sinking again. It was ridiculous. She barely knew him. But the absence of his steady, quiet presence unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. By noon, with Daisy at daycare and her shift ending, she pulled off her apron and stepped into the back hallway to grab her bag. Her phone buzzed an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her tap accept. Hello? Mara. Her breath caught. Xavier? I didn't want you to think I disappeared, he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. Something came up this morning. I'll be back tomorrow. She leaned against the wall, relief washing over her like sunlight after a storm. Oh, okay. I mean, you didn't need to call or anything. I wanted to, he interrupted. Do you have a minute? She glanced at the clock. Technically, I'm off. Would you meet me somewhere? He asked. I'll send a car. Just a conversation. Nothing weird. She hesitated. Why not just meet at the cafe? Because I want to show you something. 20 minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb outside the cafe. It wasn't flashy, but it was too polished to be ordinary, a quiet kind of wealth. The driver opened the door for her like it was second nature. Mara climbed into the back seat, nerves fluttering in her stomach. The ride didn't take long. The car turned off a main avenue and into a private garage beneath a building she'd never noticed before. When the elevator doors opened, she realized why nobody lived here. Not the way she did. The elevator led directly into a penthouse. It wasn't just big. It was a world of glass and light, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. The furniture was minimalist but expensive, the kind of clean lines and neutral tones that only worked when your life didn't involve juice stains and crayon marks. Xavier stood near the window, his black dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He turned as she stepped in, and for the first time he looked hesitant. I didn't mean to surprise you, he said. I just thought it was time you knew who I was. Mara blinked. You live here? I do. She stepped farther inside, glancing around. This isn't a normal apartment. No, he said simply. It's not. Her eyes narrowed. So what do you do, really? He reached into a drawer beneath the sleek marble island and pulled out a business card. He handed it to her without fanfare. She read the name and title once. Then again. CEO, she asked, her voice barely audible. Of Steel Enterprises? Yes. You run that massive company on Fifth Avenue? I built it, he corrected. From a small venture capital firm in my 20s. Grew it into what it is now. She stared at him. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to see me the way everyone else does, as a number. Or an opportunity. I'm not looking for either, she said, a little too sharply. I know, he replied. That's why I kept coming back. Mara folded her arms. So what is this then? A game? You drop into a coffee shop like a normal guy, get my life story over lattes, and then drop this bomb. No games, he said, stepping closer. But I don't want to pretend anymore. I wanted you to see where I really come from. She took a breath, trying to steady the wild pulse in her throat. Why? Because I want more than coffee. More than 5-minute chats between customers. His eyes searched hers. I want to know you, Mara. All of you. She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping. You say that now, but you live in a world I don't even understand. I have bills I can barely pay. A daughter who needs me full-time. I can't just drop everything to what? Play girlfriend to a billionaire? I didn't ask you to do that. No, but that's where it's headed, right? She turned away, staring out at the skyline. You don't understand what it's like. To struggle for every dollar. To wonder if you can afford daycare next month. You can't just pull someone out of that and expect them to fit into your designer life. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Come with me. She turned. Where? He didn't answer. Just opened the elevator again. She followed, unsure why. The car took them to a gallery near the river. Inside, the space was empty except for a single wall with 6 paintings. She stopped short when she saw them. They were hers. Her work. Her unfinished portfolio from art school. The pieces she'd sold online for grocery money. All hanging in gold frames, beautifully lit. Her voice cracked. How did you find these? I tracked them down. Bought every one. Why? Because they're beautiful, he said. And because I wanted you to see them the way I see you, brilliant, overlooked, and worth everything. She turned to him, eyes shining. You didn't have to. I know, he said. But I wanted to. She looked at the paintings again, a hand to her mouth. I'm not trying to rescue you, Mara, he said softly. I just want to walk beside you if you'll let me. Her walls, built from years of disappointment and abandonment, trembled. I don't know how to be part of your world, she whispered. Then don't be, he replied. Let me be part of yours. They stood in silence, the hum of the gallery lights the only sound. Then she reached for his hand, not tentative, not unsure. Just real. It was the first time she'd willingly touched him. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was standing alone. Later that evening, after she'd returned home and tucked Daisy into bed, Mara sat at her kitchen table staring at the business card he'd left behind. Not because she needed it, but because it reminded her that sometimes people weren't what they first seemed. And sometimes they were better. Mara stood on the sidewalk outside Café Nora, her breath fogging in the early evening air. She tightened the scarf around her neck and glanced down the street where headlights glowed against wet pavement. The wind carried the faint scent of roasted chestnuts from a vendor across the corner. But it wasn't enough to distract her from the bundle of nerves tightening in her stomach. Xavier's car pulled up, sleek and charcoal gray, the kind of vehicle that moved like it belonged to the future. The back door opened without a word from the driver. She hesitated only a moment before sliding in. Inside, the leather was warm against her legs and soft instrumental jazz played from hidden speakers. She clutched her purse a little tighter as Xavier glanced over at her. You're quiet, he said. I'm not used to being picked up in cars that probably cost more than my apartment building. He let out a short breath. I asked if you wanted to meet somewhere else, but you said yes to this. I did. She looked out the window. I guess I'm still figuring out what that means. They didn't speak much on the drive. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much. And neither of them wanted to risk fumbling it. When the car finally stopped, Mara blinked at the entrance of the building. It wasn't a restaurant or a hotel or anything she could categorize normally. Glass doors shimmered under golden lighting, and a valet stepped forward immediately even though there were no other guests in sight. Xavier gestured for her to follow. Inside, the space unfolded like a dream. A single long table waited in the center of a room paneled in dark oak with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on both sides. Dozens of candles flickered in low glass holders, casting shadows across bottles of wine and polished silverware. The room smelled faintly of aged paper and vanilla. This isn't a restaurant, she said. No, Xavier replied, pulling out a chair for her. It's a private library. Belongs to a friend who owed me a favor. She sat slowly, her hands still tense. Is this something you do often? Reserve entire buildings for casual dinners? I've never done this before. She looked at him, and for the first time that evening, something inside her softened. A waiter appeared silently, placing a delicate plate of ravioli garnished with what looked like edible flowers. Mara blinked down at it. I don't even know which fork to use. Xavier poured wine into her glass. Use the one you like best. She laughed under her breath and picked up the smallest one. Their conversation started cautiously, like birds testing the wind before flight. but something about the quiet elegance of the room, the way the candlelight danced in his eyes, loosened words from her she hadn't expected to share. "I used to sketch at night," she said, tracing a finger along the rim of her glass. "After Daisy fell asleep, I'd sit on the kitchen floor with a cup of tea and draw until my hand cramped. That was before I had to pick up extra shifts." "Why stop?" Xavier asked. "Because dreams don't pay grocery bills. And there's only so much you can do when you're raising a child alone." He studied her, the candlelight catching the edge of his jaw. "You don't talk about her father." "There's nothing to talk about. He left before she was born. Said he wasn't ready for the responsibility, and then disappeared." Xavier didn't offer pity. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He simply said, "You've done everything on your own." She nodded, surprised at the sting in her throat. "I never had a choice." "You did," he said quietly. "You chose to fight." Mara looked down, blinking hard. "I don't want to be someone you admire from a distance. I'm tired of being a story that makes people feel better about their own lives." "I don't admire you from a distance," he said. "I'm sitting right here." She met his eyes. "Why me, Xavier? You could be with anyone. Models, heiresses, women who know how to wear 5-inch heels without falling over. I've had all of that. None of it made me feel anything. You did. The first time I saw you, I couldn't stop thinking about you. And not because of how you looked, but because of how you held your daughter like the world might fall apart if you let go." Mara's chest tightened. She reached for her water glass to steady her hands. "I'm not someone you can date for fun," she said. "My life is messy. It's not going to fit into your world of candlelit libraries and valet parking." "I don't want you to fit into my world," he said. "I want to build something new with you. Something honest." The waiter returned to clear their plates. Neither of them moved. After dessert, a barely sweet lemon tart with a crisp crust, Xavier stood and extended his hand. "Come here." She looked up. "Why?" "Just trust me." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. He led her to the far end of the room, where a tall window opened onto a terrace. The city spread out below them, glowing with 1,000 gold lights. Snow had started to fall, soft and silent. Xavier pulled a small black box from his inside pocket. Mara stiffened. "No, don't. It's not what you think," he said. "Open it." Inside was a key. She looked at him, confused. "It's for a studio space. East Side. It's already got easels, supplies, everything you might need. You don't owe me anything. I just want you to have time to draw again." Her voice faltered. "You can't just give me things like this." "I can. And I want to." "Why?" "Because when I was 21 and broke, someone gave me a desk and a laptop and said, 'Go build something.' And it changed everything. You don't need saving, Mara. But you deserve a chance." She stared at the key in her palm, the weight of it unreal. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll use it." She nodded once, swallowing hard. "Okay." They stood in silence, the city humming beneath them, snow drifting against the glass. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. "So am I." She glanced at him. "Really?" He smiled, not the polished kind he wore in meetings, but something quieter. "I've never let anyone this close." Mara's fingers curled around the key. "I don't know where this is going. Then we'll figure it out together." And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to protect herself from the fall. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man beneath the title. Not the billionaire. Not the CEO. Just Xavier. And maybe, just maybe, he was exactly what she needed. Not to rescue her, but to remind her that she was still allowed to dream. Mara stood in front of the tall white door, her hand hovering just above the gold handle. She could hear Daisy's laughter echoing faintly down the hallway behind her, where her neighbor Mrs. Carter from across the hall was watching her for the next hour. Mara had barely explained anything when she'd asked the favor, just that she had somewhere important to be. Mrs. Carter had smiled knowingly and waved her off with a wink. She drew a breath and stepped inside the studio. The moment she entered, her body stilled. Afternoon light poured through the wide windows, throwing warm amber streaks across the wooden floors. 3 easels stood in perfect formation near the far wall, their blank canvases waiting. Along one side, a tall cabinet sat open, revealing rows of oil paints and charcoal sets, neatly arranged pastels, and brushes of every size. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and linseed. She walked farther in, her fingertips grazing the edge of a fresh sketchpad. It wasn't just a workspace. It was a promise. Behind her, the door clicked shut. She turned to find Xavier standing there, his coat folded over his arm, his expression unreadable. "I didn't expect you," she said. "I had a meeting nearby," he replied. "Thought I'd check in." She searched his face. "You didn't have to do any of this." "I know." He walked further in, his polished shoes silent against the wood. "Have you drawn anything yet?" "No," she admitted. "I just got here." He nodded once, then sat gently on the edge of the low bench by the window. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what?" "About the way I handle things. I'm used to finding solutions. Fixing problems. That's how I build everything. But I don't want to treat you like one." Her chest tightened. "I never felt like you were trying to fix me." "No? Then maybe I've been lucky," he said, glancing up. "Because I've been afraid I'd push too hard or say the wrong thing and you'd walk away." She stepped closer. "I've been afraid of the same thing." He looked at her carefully. "Then maybe we stop being afraid." She sank onto the bench beside him, the sunlight warming her legs. "I don't know how." "We start slow," Xavier said. "We tell the truth even when it's messy." "All right," she whispered. "You go first." He leaned his forearms on his knees, hands clasped. "There's a board member at Steel Enterprises. Vincent Corbin. He's old money, legacy family. Hates how I run things. I've been getting pressure from him to relocate headquarters to Chicago. He says it's more fiscally sound. Would you do it?" "No. But they're threatening to call a vote. If I lose, I'd be forced to step down." Her eyes widened. "They can do that?" "With enough support, yes." "Why tell me this?" "Because you matter," he said. "And if this turns into something serious, you'll be part of all of it. The good and the brutal." Mara took a long breath. "I'm not afraid of hard things." "No," he said. "You never have been." She hesitated. "If you had to move, would you?" "I'd fight it," he said. "But if I lost, I'd have to consider it." Mara's hands curled over the bench. "I can't leave the city. Not with Daisy. Her daycare, her pediatrician, my job." "I know." Silence stretched between them. Then Xavier stood and faced her. "I'm not asking you to make decisions yet. I just need you to know what's coming." She nodded, her thoughts tangled. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you." "What is it?" "A commission agreement." "Not from me. From a gallery I trust. I showed them your work. They want to feature 5 new pieces next season." Her eyes locked onto the envelope. "You showed them?" "I didn't tell them who you were. Just gave them the art. They loved it. You didn't ask me first." "I know. And I'll never do something like that again without your okay. But I wanted you to see that your work speaks for itself." She took the envelope slowly, her fingers trembling as she opened it. The letter inside was crisp and formal. The number at the bottom made her blink twice. "This can't be real." "It is." Mara clutched the paper to her chest. "What if I fail?" "You won't." She looked up at him, the panic in her chest giving way to something steadier. "Then I need to try." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good." Later that night, Mara walked the quiet streets back to her apartment, her steps uneven. The commission letter was tucked safely into her bag, but her mind wasn't on the money. It was on everything that could change. She opened her front door to find Daisy asleep on the couch, her head resting against Mrs. Carter's arm. The older woman gave her a small wave and slipped out with a whispered goodnight. Mara sat beside her daughter, brushing a curl from her cheek. Her heart thudded in her chest, loud and uncertain. She was falling in love with a man whose world was built on power and pressure and things that could crush people like her. And yet, when he looked at her, she didn't feel small. A week passed. Then another. The gallery sent over a contract. Mara signed. She began painting again, late into the night after Daisy was asleep, with music playing low and her heart full of wild, unfamiliar hope. Xavier came by the cafe less often, but when he did, he stayed longer. They didn't talk about the board vote again, but Mara could feel the tension in him building each time they parted. Then one Friday afternoon, she walked into the studio and found him already there. He was standing by the window, his suit jacket folded over a chair, tie loosened. She didn't speak, just waited. "They voted," he said. Her throat tightened. "And? I lost." The word hit her like cold water. "What happens now?" "I stepped down. In 30 days. She moved toward him. And then Chicago? No, he said. I declined the relocation. Let them do it without me. But your company was never worth trading you for. Her breath caught. He turned to face her fully. I built Steel Enterprises from nothing. But I built it for power, for control, for all the wrong reasons. And then I met you. You gave that up? I gave up a seat at a table I no longer respected, he said. I'm not walking away from everything. Just the part that cost too much. She closed the space between them, her voice low. What will you do now? Something better. Maybe start a foundation. Maybe invest in artists who've been overlooked. Maybe just breathe for a while. Her fingers reached for his. He held them tightly. I don't want your money, she said. I know. And I don't want to be someone you gave everything up for. You're not, he said. You're someone I chose everything for. Tears pricked her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. They stood there for a long time, the city soft and golden behind them. 2 months later, Mara's paintings hung in the front window of a gallery on Lexington Avenue. People stopped to take photos. A critic called her work startling and luminous. She stood beside Xavier at the opening night, her hand wrapped in his, her daughter's laughter echoing from the back room where she played with a gallery assistant. When someone asked Mara how she'd gotten her start, she smiled. I was standing in line at a pharmacy, she said. And someone saw me. Xavier leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. I more than saw you, he whispered. She turned, eyes shining. I know. And when he kissed her, surrounded by strangers, lights, and the life they'd built from nothing, she didn't feel like she'd stepped into his world. She felt like they'd created a new one together. The spring air shimmered with the scent of blooming linden trees as Mara stepped out of the gallery, her heels clicking softly against the stone steps. The exhibit had closed an hour ago, but the world felt far from quiet. Her final piece had just sold for more than her entire annual salary from the cafe, and while the gallery owner toasted champagne with eager patrons inside, Mara had slipped out for a moment of stillness. She wandered across the street to the small park with wrought iron benches and freshly cut grass, her thoughts too full to sit still. The city had always been loud, but somehow she'd found a rhythm in it again, a piece of herself she'd thought had been permanently dulled by motherhood and survival. Now the colors came back. The inspiration returned. And with it, so had the hunger to create. Xavier found her exactly where he expected, barefoot now, her shoes dangling from her fingertips, standing near the fountain with her hair caught in the breeze. He walked up behind her and said nothing, just slipped his hand into hers and waited. Do you ever think about how strange it is? She asked after a long pause. The way everything changed from one small moment? I do, he said. But I think it wasn't the moment. It was you. She turned to face him. I'm still not sure how this happened. I am, he said. You were the only person who ever made me stop moving. And I didn't even realize how much I needed to. Mara studied his face. Your life is different now. It's freer. He lifted her hand to his lips. And better. And you're okay with not being in control of everything anymore? I'm learning to like the unknown, he said. Especially when it comes with you. She smiled, then looked past him toward the gallery. There's something I didn't tell you. He raised an eyebrow. The gallery owner introduced me to someone tonight. A curator. She runs a studio residency in Florence, Italy, not Oregon. Xavier stilled. And she wants me to apply. The 6 months. All expenses covered. A private loft with access to workshops and mentors. She said my work fits the theme of the next cycle. Rebirth. He didn't answer right away. You should go, he said finally. I haven't said yes. But you want to. I want to know what we'd do, she said. What would happen to us? He reached into his jacket and pulled something out, small, velvet, and unmistakable. Mara's heart dropped into her stomach. Wait. Don't panic, he said, giving her a lopsided grin. I'm not rushing you down an aisle. But I've never been sure about anything the way I'm sure about this. She stared at him, breath caught. He opened the box. Inside was a ring unlike any she'd seen, delicate, with a single oval sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, the band thin and elegant, like something meant to last forever. I don't want to lose you to Italy or to anything else. But I'll never ask you to stay if it means you give up something for me. I want to be part of your story wherever it's written. Florence. Manhattan. A tiny town in the middle of nowhere. If that's where you find your inspiration. She blinked hard, her voice cracking. Xavier. He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. He held her gaze steadily and said, "Marry me not today, not tomorrow, but someday, when you're ready, when Daisy's ready, when life makes room for it." Mara looked down at the ring, then back at him, her throat tight with emotion. "I don't need time," he stilled. "I want to say yes now," she whispered, "because wherever I go, I want you with me. I want you in the sketches and the spaces between them. I want you in the life I'm building with Daisy. I don't need more time. I just need you." His breath left him in a rush. She took the ring from the box and slid it onto her finger. "Then it's settled," he said. She nodded, tears trailing down her cheeks, laughter bubbling through them. "It's really settled." He pulled her close, burying his face in the crook of her neck, and for a long time, they stayed wrapped in each other beneath the street lamps, the city moving around them like a dream. 6 months later, the Florence studio windows opened to a view of rolling hills and terracotta rooftops. Mara stood barefoot on the cool tile floor, charcoal smudged across her fingers, her latest piece drying on the easel behind her. Daisy napped in the next room, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. Xavier walked in, holding a cup of espresso and a book he couldn't read because he'd been watching her instead. "You're staring," she said without turning. "I'll never stop." She laughed softly. "You said that yesterday, and I'll say it tomorrow." They kissed like people who had learned to wait and trust and build slow fires, no longer rushing toward something, but living inside it. In the fall, they returned to New York. Their wedding was small, held in the garden behind the gallery where she'd first exhibited. Vines curled around iron trellises, and Daisy ran down the aisle tossing flower petals, her white dress trailing behind her like a cloud. Xavier waited at the altar, his suit sharp, eyes never leaving Mara's. She wore a simple silk gown, her hair pinned with tiny pearls. There were only 30 guests' friends, the gallery owner, Mrs. Carter, and a few people from Xavier's new philanthropic foundation. No press, no spectacle, just the vows they wrote themselves. "I don't promise perfection," Mara said, her voice trembling. "But I promise truth. I promise to fight for us, to love you when it's easy and when it isn't." Xavier took her hands, his own voice steady. "I promise to never ask you to be anyone but yourself. I promise to protect your dreams like they're my own. And I promise to love you with every part of me." When they kissed, the world narrowed to just them. Later, at the reception, Daisy stood on Xavier's shoes while they danced, her head against his chest. Mara watched, her heart aching in the best way. She'd never imagined this life. Not the art, not the love, not the second chances. But every stroke of it had been earned. And it was hers. As the evening faded into stars and quiet music, Mara leaned against Xavier on the terrace, her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how it started?" she asked. "I think about it every day," he said. "A woman in line with cough syrup and a child on her hip. And a man who didn't ask for thanks. You gave me everything instead." Their fingers laced together. The future didn't scare her anymore, because she knew who she'd face it with. And she knew that love, not money, not power, was the only thing that made her feel truly wealthy. They stayed on that terrace until the candles flickered out and the city whispered around them and their forever began.